Chapter 4 Social Revolts and Political Kites and Crows. When the aristocracy come forward, the people fall backward. When the people come forward, the aristocracy, fearful of being left behind, insinuate themselves into our ranks and rise into timid leaders of treacherous auxiliaries. Secret Manifesto of Projectors of United Irish Society, 1791. In the north of Ireland, the secret organisations of the peasantry were known variously as Oak Boys and Hearts of Steel or Steel Boys. The former directed their efforts mainly against the system of compulsory road repairing, by which they were required to contribute their unpaid labour for the upkeep of the country roads, a system, needless to say, offering every opportunity to the country gentry to secure labour gratuitously for the embellishment of their estates and private roads on the pretext of serving public ends. The Oak Boy organisation was particularly strong in the counties of Monaghan, Armagh and Tyrone. In a pamphlet published about the year 1762, an account is given of a rising of the peasantry in the first-named county, and of the heroic exploits of the officer in command of the troops engaged in suppressing said rising, in a manner which irresistibly recalls the present accounts in the English newspapers of the punitive expeditions of the British Army against the marauding hill tribes of India, or Dacoits of Burma. The work is entitled True and Faithful Account of the Late Insurrections in the North, with a narrative, Colonel Coote's campaign amongst the Oak Boys in County Monaghan, etc. The historian tells how, on hearing of the rising, the brave British officer set off with his men to the town of Castleblarney, how on his way thither he passed numerous bodies of the peasantry proceeding in the same direction, each with an oak bough or twig stuck in his hat as a sign of his treasonable sympathies, how on entering Castleblarney he warned the people to disperse and only received defiant replies and even hostile manifestations, how he then took refuge in the market-house and prepared to defend it if need be, and how, after occupying that stronghold all night, he found the next morning the rebels had withdrawn from the town. Next there is an account of the same valiant general's entry into the town of Ballybay. Here he found all the houses shut against him, each house proudly displaying an oak bough in its windows, and all the people seemingly prepared to resist to the uttermost. Apparently determined to make an example and so to strike terror, the valiant soldier and his men proceeded to arrest the ringleader, and, after a severe struggle, did succeed in breaking into some one of the cabins of the poor people, and arresting some person, who was accordingly hauled off to the town of Monaghan, there to be dealt with according to the forms of the law, from which every consideration of justice was rigorously excluded. In the town of Clones, we are informed, the people withstood the royal forces in the marketplace, but were, of course, defeated. The Monaghan Oak Boys were then driven across the borders of their own county into Armagh, where they made a last stand, but were attacked and defeated in a pitched battle, the severity of which may be gauged from the fact that no casualties were reported on the side of the troops. But the general feeling of the people was so pronouncedly against the system of compulsory and unpaid labour on the roads, the government subsequently abolished the practice and instituted a road rate, providing for payment for such necessary labour by a tax upon owners and occupiers of property in the district. Needless to say, the poor peasants who were suffering martyrdom in prison for their efforts to remedy what the government had by such remedial legislation admitted to be an injustice, were left to rot in their cells, the usual fate of pioneers of reform. The Steel Boys were a more formidable organisation and had their strongholds in the counties of Down and Antrim. They were for the most part Presbyterian or other dissenters from the established church, and, like the White Boys, aimed at the abolition or reduction of tithes, and the restriction of the system of consolidating farms for grazing purposes. They frequently appeared in arms and moved with a certain degree of discipline, coming together from widely separated parts in obedience, apparently, to the orders of a common centre. In the year 1722, 6 of their number were arrested and lodged in the town jail of Belfast. Their associates immediately mustered in thousands, and in the open day marched upon the city, made themselves masters thereof, stormed the jail, and released their comrades. This daring action excited consternation in the ranks of the governing classes. Troops were dispatched to the spot, and every precaution taken to secure the arrest of the leaders. Out of the numerous prisoners made, a batch was selected for trial, but whether as a result of intimidation or because of their sympathy with the prisoners, it is difficult to tell, the jury in Belfast refused to convict, and when the trial was changed to Dublin, the government was equally unfortunate. The refusal of the juries to convict was probably, in a large measure, due to the unpopularity of the act then just introduced to enable the government to put persons accused of agrarian offences on trial in a different county to their own. When this act was repealed, the convictions and executions went on as merrily as before. Many a peasant's corpse swung on the gibbet, and many a promising life was doomed to blight and decay in the foul confines of the prison hell to glut the vengeance of the dominant classes. Arthur Young, in his Tour of Ireland, thus describes the state of matters against which those poor peasants revolted. Quote, "A landlord in Ireland can scarcely invent an order which a servant, labourer, or cottier dares to refuse to execute. Disrespect, or anything tending towards sauciness, he may punish with his cane or his horsewhip with the most perfect security. A poor man would have his bones broken if he offered to lift a hand in his own defence. Landlords of consequence have assured me that many of their cottiers would think themselves honoured by having their wives and daughters sent for to the bed of their master, a mark of slavery which proves the oppression under which people must live." End of quote. It will be observed by the attentive student that the patriots who occupied the public stage in Ireland during the period we have been dealing with never once raised their voices in protest against such social injustice. Like their imitators today, they regarded the misery of the Irish people as a convenient handle for political agitation, and, like their imitators today, they were ever ready to outvie even the government in their denunciation of all those who, more earnest than themselves, sought to find a radical cure for such misery. Of the trio of patriots, Swift, Molyneux, and Lucas, it may be noted that their fight was simply a repetition of the fight waged by Sarsfield and his followers in their day. A change of persons and of stage costume, truly, but no change of character. A battle between the kites and the crows. They found themselves members of a privileged class living upon the plunder of the Irish people, but early perceived, to their dismay, that they could not maintain their position as a privileged class without the aid of the English army, and in return for supplying that army, the English ruling class were determined to have the lion's share of the plunder. The Irish Parliament was essentially an English institution, nothing like it existed before the Norman Conquest. In that respect, it was on the same footing as landlordism, capitalism, and their natural-born child pauperism. England sent a swarm of adventurers to conquer Ireland. Having partly succeeded, these adventurers established a parliament to settle disputes among themselves, to contrive measures for robbing the natives, and to prevent their fellow tyrants who had stayed in England from claiming the spoil. But in course of time, the section of land thieves resident in England did claim a right to supervise the doings of the adventurers in Ireland, and consequently to control their parliament. Hence arose Poyning's law, and the subordination of Dublin Parliament to London Parliament. Finding this subordinate position of the Parliament enabled the English ruling class to strip the Irish workers of the fruit of their toil, the more far-seeing of the privileged class in Ireland became alarmed lest the stripping process should go too far and leave nothing for them to fatten upon. At once they became patriots, anxious that Ireland, which in their phraseology meant the ruling class in Ireland, should be free from the control of the Parliament of England. Their pamphlets, speeches, and all public pronouncements were devoted to telling the world how much nicer, equitable, and altogether more delectable it would be for the Irish people to be robbed in the interests of the native-born aristocracy than to witness the painful spectacle of that aristocracy being compelled to divide the plunder with its English rival. Perhaps Swift, Molyneux, or Lucas did not confess even to themselves that such was the basis of their political creed. The human race has at all times shown a proneness to gloss over its basest actions when a multitude of specious pretences, and to cover even its iniquities with the glamour of a false sentimentality. But we are not dealing with appearances, but realities, and, in justice to ourselves, we must expose the flimsy sophistry which strives to impart to a sordid, self-seeking struggle the appearance of a patriotic movement. In opposition to the movements of the people, the patriotic politicians and the government alike were an undivided mass. In their fight against the tithes, the Munster peasantry in 1786 issued a remarkable document, which we here reprint as an illustration of the thought of the people of the provinces at that time. This document was copied into many papers at the time, and was also reprinted as a pamphlet in October of that year. Quote, "Letter addressed to the Munster peasantry to obviate the bad impression made by the calumnies of our enemies. We beg leave to submit to you our claim for the protection of a humane gentry, and humbly solicit yours, if said claim shall appear to you founded in justice and good policy. In every age, country, and religion, the priesthood are allowed to have been artful, usurping, and tenacious of their ill-acquired prerogatives. Often have their jarring interests and opinions deluged with Christian blood this long-devoted isle. Some 30 years ago, our unhappy fathers, galled beyond human sufferance like a captive lion vainly struggling in the toils, strove violently to snap their bonds asunder, but instead riveted them more tight. Exhausted by the bloody struggle, the poor of this province submitted to their oppression and fattened with their vitals each decimating leech. The luxurious parson drowned in the riot of his table the bitter groans of those wretches that his proctor fleeced, and the poor remnant of the proctor's rapine was sure to be gleaned by the rapacious priest. But it was blasphemy to complain of him. Heaven, we thought, would wing its lightning to blast the wretch who grudged the Holy Father's share. Thus plundered by either clergy, we had reason to wish for our simple druids again. At last, however, it pleased pitying heaven to dispel the murky cloud of bigotry that hovered over us so long. Liberality shot her cheering rays and enlightened the peasant's hovel, as well as the splendid hall. O'Leary told us, plain as friar could, that a God of a universal love would not confine his salvation to one sect alone, and that the subject's election was the best title to the crown. Thus improved in our religion and our politics, we resolved to evince on every occasion the change in our sentiments, and hope to succeed in our sincere attempts. We examined the double causes of our grievances, and debated long how to get them removed, until, at length, our resolves terminated in this general, peaceful remonstrance. Humanity, justice, and policy enforce our request. Whilst the tithe farmer enjoys the fruit of our labours, agriculture must decrease, and while the gripping priest insists on more for the bridegroom than he is worth, population must be retarded. Let the legislature befriend us now, and we are theirs forever. Our sincerity in the warmth of our attachment, when once professed, was never questioned, and we are bold to say no such imputation will ever fall on the Munster peasantry. At a very numerous and peaceable meeting of the delegates of the Munster peasantry, held on Thursday, the 1st day of July, 1786, the following resolutions were unanimously agreed to, viz. Resolved, that we will continue to oppose our oppressors by the most justifiable means in our power, either until they are glutted with our blood, or until humanity raises her angry voice in the councils of the nation to protect the toiling peasant and lighten his burden. Resolved that the fickleness of the multitude makes it necessary for all and each of us to swear not to pay voluntarily priest or parson more than as follows: potatoes first crop 6 shillings per acre, second crop 4 shillings, wheat 4 shillings, barley 4 shillings, oats 3 shillings, meadowing 2 shillings 8 pence, marriage 5 shillings, baptism 1 shilling 6 pence, each family confession 2 shillings, parish priest's Sunday Mass 1 shilling, any other 1 shilling, extreme unction 1 shilling. Signed by order, William O'Driscoll, General to the Munster peasantry.